Horrifying when a young mother has to go hungry for 3 consecutive days, with only exactly $20 left in her pocket, huddled in a cheap diner on Christmas Eve as thick snow falls relentlessly, clinging tightly to her 4 5-year-old identical daughters who are shivering from cold and fear. Can you imagine that moment, when she thinks all hope has been extinguished, that the debt collectors will soon knock on the door one last time to take away the final breath of her little family? Then the diner door suddenly swings open. A skin-cutting cold wind rushes in along with a tall man in a black cashmere coat, the man that all of Chicago fears. He looks straight into her eyes, and everything begins to change forever. Do you dare to listen to the rest of this story? Before we dive into this chilling and mysterious story, please remember to subscribe to the channel Alex Truths and like this video. Every subscription, like, and share from you is a huge spiritual gift and an incredibly profound source of motivation for the channel's growth, so we can continue bringing wonderful videos every day to everyone. There would be no greater joy than receiving your love and support through the comments you leave right below this video comments, sharing your emotions or telling us which province or city you're living and working in while listening to this story. Alright, let's continue together and immerse ourselves in this amazing, captivating story that's filled with deep emotions. The wind howled off Lake Michigan, whipping snow against the frosted windows of the little 24-hour diner on the south side of Chicago. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee, greasy bacon, and the faint pine scent of a cheap plastic Christmas tree blinking in the corner. Emily Harper sat huddled in the farthest booth, her thin frame pressed protectively around her 4 5-year-old daughters, Ava, Bella, Chloe, and Emma. The girls wore mismatched hand-me-down coats that had once belonged to cousins, now too small at the wrists and elbows. Their cheeks were pale, their blonde hair limp and unwashed for days. Chloe's breathing carried that faint wheeze Emily had learned to dread, the asthma that flared whenever the cold bit too deep or the stress rose too high. Emily's own coat, an old navy pea coat she had found at a Goodwill bin, was zipped to her chin, even though the diner's heater rattled warmly overhead. Beneath it, her sweater was threadbare, stained, and smelled faintly of the mildew from the last motel room. She could not risk anyone seeing how thin she had become. Her ribs showed when she breathed too deeply. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the laminated menu for the 10th time, though she already knew every price by heart. $20. That was all that remained in the worn leather wallet Mike had given her on their first anniversary. $20 folded and refolded so many times the bills felt soft as cloth. She had not eaten a full meal in 3 days. Her stomach no longer growled. It simply ached with a dull, constant emptiness she had trained herself to ignore. "Mommy, I'm cold," Emma whispered, pressing closer. The little girl's voice was small, careful, as though loud words might make the world punish them again. "I know, baby," Emily answered, her own voice soft and timid the way it always became when fear sat heavy on her chest. "We'll warm up here a little longer." She looked at the menu again. 4 kids' cheeseburgers with fries split between the 4 girls would come to $16.48 with tax. 2 small milks to share. That left just enough for a tip so the waitress would not remember them too clearly. Emily would drink water from the tap in whichever motel bathroom they found tonight. The waitress, a tired woman in her 50s named Donna, with gray-streaked hair pulled into a bun, appeared beside the booth. Her eyes were kind but weary, the eyes of someone who had seen too many hard Christmases. "What can I get you, hon?" Emily's throat closed. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Ava looked up at her with wide blue eyes. Bella reached over and touched Emily's arm gently as if to steady her. Four kids' cheeseburger meals, please." Emily finally managed her voice barely above a whisper. "And 2 small milks to share." Donna scribbled without looking up. "Anything for you, sweetheart." Emily shook her head quickly, too quickly. "No, thank you. Just for them." The waitress paused. Her gaze flicked over Emily's hollow cheeks, the dark circles under her eyes, the way the 4 little girls clung to their mother like frightened sparrows. Something softened in Donna's face, but she said nothing. She simply nodded and walked away. Emily let out a slow, shaky breath. Her fingers still gripped the edge of the menu as though it might fly away. Chloe leaned her head against Emily's side. "Mommy, are we going home after this?" Home. The word stabbed like a knife. They had not had a home since the men came and took the little bungalow in Gary, Indiana, 6 months earlier. Since they stripped the rooms bare while the girls watched from the hallway, clutching their stuffed animals. Since they drove away with Mike's pickup truck and every stick of furniture, every photograph, every Christmas ornament Emily had collected since childhood. Now home was a different, cheap motel every few nights, paid for with cash earned scrubbing offices after midnight. Home was the back seat of the ancient Honda Civic when money ran out. Home was wherever Emily could park far from streetlights and lock the doors while the girls slept curled under an old quilt. "We'll find a warm place tonight, sweet girl," Emily whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Chloe's forehead. We always do. But inside, despair clawed at her. After tonight, she had $43 left in the glove compartment money she was saving for Chloe's new inhaler. The current one was almost empty. Without it, Emily pushed the thought away. She could not afford panic. The door chimed again, letting in another blast of icy air. Emily's head snapped up instinctively, her body tensing. An older couple shuffled in, laughing softly as they shook snow from their boots. Not them. Not the men who hunted her. She relaxed fractionally, but the fear never fully left. It lived under her skin now, a constant hum. The food arrived minutes later, 4 small cheeseburgers cut in half, fries piled in paper baskets, 2 milks with bendy straws. The girl's eyes lit up like Christmas morning had come early. Emily's heart cracked open at the sight. "Go ahead, babies," she whispered, forcing a smile. "Eat." They did not need telling twice. Tiny hands reached for the food cheese, stretching between fingers, fries dipped in ketchup. Emily watched them, tears burning behind her eyes. This was all she could give them tonight. This and the promise that tomorrow she would find a way. She did not notice the door open again. Did not notice the sudden hush that fell over the diner like a blanket of snow. Did not notice the way conversations died mid-sentence, forks frozen halfway to mouths. Not until the coldest blast of air yet swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of expensive leather and winter night. Vincent Rossi stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, fair-skinned, with sharp features and eyes, the pale blue of winter steel. His black cashmere overcoat was tailored perfection, snow melting on shoulders that carried the weight of half of Chicago's hidden empire. Behind him came 4 men, silent, watchful, dressed in dark suits that cost more than Emily made in a month of night cleaning. The diner went dead still. Emily felt it before she saw him, the shift in the air, the way danger settled over the room like frost. Her breath caught. Her hand instinctively moved to cover Chloe's pressing, the little girl's fingers against the table. Ava stopped chewing. Bella's eyes widened. Emma whispered, "Mommy." "Shh." Emily breathed so softly it was barely sound. "Don't move." She knew this silence. She had felt it the day the collectors came to her house, the day they smiled while taking everything. Vincent Rossi did not need to speak. His presence commanded the room. He stood just inside the doorway, snowflakes melting in his dark hair, scanning the diner with calm, predatory precision. His gaze passed over each table, the trucker at the counter, the young couple near the window, the elderly pair in the corner. Then it landed on Emily. For 3 endless seconds, those pale eyes held hers. She felt stripped bare, her hunger, her fear, her shame laid open under that stare. Her heart hammered so violently she feared the girls would hear it. Something flickered across Vincent's face, something swift and unreadable. Then he looked away. Emily sagged with relief, dizziness washing over her. The room slowly breathed again. Conversations resumed in whispers. Donna moved cautiously toward Vincent's chosen booth near the back. But Emily could still feel his attention like a physical weight. From the corner of her eye, she saw him sit, saw one of his men slide in across from him, the others standing watch. Saw the way he ordered only black coffee, yet told Donna to get whatever she wanted that he was paying. And still she felt watched. Vincent Rossi had not built his empire by ignoring instinct, and every instinct screamed that the woman in the corner booth was not merely poor, she was hunted. He watched her protective hunch, the way she angled her body to shield 4 identical little faces. Watched her touch an inner pocket, compulsively counting what little money remained. Watched her daughters eat while she drank only water, her own plate empty. Starving. Not by choice, but by sacrifice. Something ancient and painful stirred in Vincent's chest, guilt, long-buried remorse that never quite died. Memories of another Christmas Eve, decades ago, when he was a boy in Little Italy, watching his own widowed mother count pennies for bread while men in expensive coats waited outside. He had sworn no one would suffer that way again. Not if he could stop it. Yet here it was, staring back at him across a cheap diner booth. The conflict tore at him, violent, consuming. He was a man who ruled through fear, who had blood on his ledger. How dare he feel this pull toward mercy? How dare he feel anything at all? But he did. And for the first time in years, Vincent Rossi felt the ice around his heart crack just a little. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing Chicago in white silence. Inside, 2 broken worlds sat 20 feet apart, waiting for the moment they would collide. Emily's gaze drifted from her daughter's small hands, clutching halves of cheeseburgers, to the frosted window, where snow swirled under the orange glow of a street lamp. The diner's Christmas lights blinked red and green across the glass, but they could not touch the cold that lived inside her. 6 months had passed since the world she knew shattered, yet the memory still rose, unbidden, sharp and merciless, pulling her back into the darkness she fought every day to keep from her girls. It had begun with a phone call on a gray June morning, an Indiana State Trooper's voice flat and careful. Mike had fallen asleep at the wheel on Interstate 65, his rig crossing the median, colliding head-on with an oncoming semi. Dead on impact. 34 years old. The girls had been playing in the living room when Emily dropped the phone and sank to the floor, the scream trapped in her throat, so it would not frighten them. The funeral came and went in a blur of casseroles from neighbors and borrowed black dresses. Emily clung to the belief that life insurance would carry them through. Mike had always promised he had a policy. But 2 weeks later, while she was still folding his work shirts that smelled faintly of diesel and coffee, 2 men knocked on the door of their modest bungalow in Gary. Lenny and Carlo. They wore cheap suits that strained at the shoulders and gold chains that caught the porch light. Their smiles were thin, polite, almost kind until they were not. Mrs. Harper. Lenny had said, stepping inside without waiting for invitation, "Your husband owed us $43,000. Gambling debts. Signed and witnessed. Debt doesn't die with the man." Emily had stood frozen in the hallway, the girls peeking from behind her legs. She had known nothing about gambling. Mike had always come home tired but smiling, kissing the tops of 4 identical blonde heads before lifting Emily off her feet. There had been late nights, yes, and whispered phone calls, but she had trusted him. They gave her 1 week. When she begged for time, showed them bank statements with $300 remaining. Showed them the life insurance claim still pending. Investigation. Carlo had leaned close enough for her to smell his cigarette breath. "We don't do mercy, sweetheart. Next time we come, we take what's owed." They came back with a box truck. Took the couch where Mike used to fall asleep watching Bears games. Took the dining table Emily's father had built. Took the bunk beds the girls shared while Ava and Bella cried and clung to the railings. Took Mike's toolbox, his fishing rods, even the Christmas decorations in the attic. Emily stood on the porch in the July heat, powerless, as neighbors watched from behind curtains and did nothing. The 3rd visit brought foreclosure papers. Mike had signed the house over as collateral without telling her. The bank took possession 30 days later. Emily packed what little remained. 1 duffel bag, 4 teddy bears, the quilt her grandmother made, into the old Honda Civic, and drove away with the girls buckled in car seats that were 2 years past expiration. Since then, life had become a series of cheap motels along Cicero Avenue and Mannheim Road. Cash only. Fake names. Nights when the heater rattled but never warmed, when Chloe's wheezing woke Emily every hour to hold the inhaler to her daughter's lips. Days spent cleaning office buildings after midnight for $20 an hour under the table. The girls asleep in the car outside, or watched by whatever kind stranger at the shelter, would trade an hour for a homemade sandwich. 4 days ago, Carlo had found them again, knocking on the door of a Super 8 at 2 in the morning. Emily had peered through the peephole, heart-slamming, and seen his silhouette under the flickering neon. "We know where you are now, Emily," he had called softly through the door. "We'll always know." She had packed in 10 minutes, carried 4 sleeping girls to the car in the pouring rain, and driven through the night with no destination except away. Now on Christmas Eve, the $20 in her wallet was all that stood between them and the street. Chloe coughed quietly beside her, a dry sound that twisted Emily's stomach. The inhaler in her coat pocket had maybe 3 puffs left. The pharmacy would not refill without insurance, and insurance had lapsed when the house was taken. Emily had been saving every penny for a new one, but tonight, even that was slipping away. Across the diner, Vincent Rossi sipped his black coffee and watched her without seeming to watch. He had seen fear before, hundreds of times, in the eyes of men who owed him money or territory. But this was different. This was the fear of a mother who had nothing left to lose except her children. It clawed at something deep inside him, something he had buried beneath layers of power and control. Remorse surged hot and bitter. His own mother had worn that same haunted look 30 years ago, counting nickels for bread while loan sharks circled their Little Italy walk-up. Vincent had been 7, powerless, watching her beg on street corners for mercy that never came. When she died worn out at 42, he had sworn no one under his protection would ever suffer that way again. Yet here it was repeating itself in front of him. And worse, he recognized the names Emily had not yet spoken aloud, but that his instincts whispered. Lenny and Carlo worked the fringes of his world, low-level collectors, who had grown greedy, running unauthorized side rackets while claiming Rossi backing, preying on widows, on mothers. The betrayal burned like acid. His empire rested on rules: no children, no families, no unnecessary cruelty. These men had broken every rule, using his name to do it. Vincent's hand tightened around the coffee cup until his knuckles whitened. The conflict inside him raged, violent tearing. Part of him wanted to walk away. Mercy was weakness in his world. Another part, older and rawer, remembered a boy's helpless rage and wanted to burn everything down. His phone vibrated silently. A text from Marco outside, 2 men in a black SUV just parked across the street. Not ours. Vincent's blood went cold. Lenny and Carlo had found her again. He glanced at Emily, thin shoulders curved protectively around her daughters, eyes flicking to the door every few seconds. She felt them coming. She always felt them coming. Vincent stood slowly, buttoning his cashmere coat. The diner hushed again. He dropped a $100 bill on the table, far more than the check, and walked toward the exit without a word. His men fell in behind him. Outside, the snow had thickened, muffling the city sounds. The black SUV idled under a broken streetlight, 2 silhouettes visible inside. Vincent crossed the street alone, hands in his pockets, the picture of calm. The driver's window lowered an inch. "Evening, boss," Lenny said, voice oily with false respect. "Just handling a personal matter." Vincent stopped beside the vehicle, snow settling on his shoulders. "This woman," he said quietly, voice like winter steel, "is under my protection now. You will forget her name. You will forget her face. You will forget she exists." Carlo laughed nervously from the passenger seat. "With respect, Mr. Rossi, this debt predates." Vincent leaned down until his face filled the cracked window. His pale eyes held no mercy. "The debt is forgiven. The house, the truck, the $43,000, consider it paid in full. By me. And if I hear you've come within 10 miles of her or those little girls again, I will personally ensure you never draw another breath." The silence stretched, broken only by wind. Lenny swallowed. "Understood, boss." Vincent straightened. "Good. Drive away. Now." The SUV pulled from the curb tires, spinning briefly on ice before disappearing into the storm. Vincent stood alone in the snowfall, chest tight with emotions he could not name. Guilt for the world he had helped create. Rage at men who twisted his rules. And something new, something fierce and terrifying that bloomed when he thought of the woman inside the diner sacrificing her own meal so her daughters could eat. He looked back through the window. Emily was helping Emma wipe ketchup from her chin, her movements gentle despite the exhaustion carved into every line of her face. For the first time in decades, Vincent Rossi felt the ice around his heart fracture further. And beneath the remorse and rage, something dangerously close to love, sudden, overwhelming, impossible, took root. He did not walk away. Not tonight. Not ever. The diner door swung open again, admitting a blast of Arctic air that rattled the plastic Christmas garland above the counter. Snowflakes swirled in on the gust, melting instantly on the worn linoleum floor. Every sound in the room, the clink of forks, the low murmur of conversation, the soft holiday music from the ancient radio stopped, as though someone had pressed a mute button. Vincent Rossi stepped across the threshold. He was taller than the doorway made him seem broad-shouldered beneath a black cashmere overcoat that probably cost more than Emily's car was worth even when it was new. Fair-skinned, with sharp, angular features and dark hair lightly dusted with snow, he carried himself with the quiet, absolute authority of a man who never needed to raise his voice. Behind him came 4 men in tailored dark suits, their faces expressionless, eyes scanning every corner with practiced efficiency. They fanned out slightly, not aggressive, simply present like shadows that knew exactly where to fall. The diner went utterly still. Donna froze halfway to a table, coffee pot tilted in her hand. The trucker at the counter set down his mug without drinking. The young couple near the window stopped mid-sentence, hands suspended in the air. Even the blinking lights on the little tree seemed to slow. Emily felt the change before she saw its source. A primal chill crawled up her spine, the same instinct that had warned her when Lenny and Carlo pulled into her driveway months ago. Her body went rigid. Her hand instinctively slid across the table to cover Ava's small fingers, pressing them gently down. Chloe stopped chewing. Bella's eyes widened until the whites showed all around. Emma whispered the tiniest, "Mommy." "Shh." Emily breathed the sound, barely a movement of air. "Don't look. Don't move." She knew this silence. It was the silence that fell when danger entered a room, and every ordinary person suddenly became furniture. Breath held, hearts pounding, praying not to be noticed. Her vision tunneled. The edges darkened. She forced herself to lower her gaze to the girls' half-eaten meals, to the ketchup-smudged napkins, anything but the door. Inside her chest, panic clawed upward, hot and dizzying. Not here. Not tonight. Not in front of my babies. Vincent paused just inside the entrance, letting the door swing shut behind his men. Snow melted on the shoulders of his coat, dripping onto the mat. He did not stamp his feet or shake off the cold like normal people. He simply stood, letting the room adjust to his presence the way the tide adjusts to the moon. His pale eyes moved slowly across the diner, cataloging everything with calm precision. The elderly couple clutching hands in the corner booth, the lone waitress standing motionless, the family near the window trying to look casual and is failing. His gaze was not cruel, not threatening, simply absolute. It said without words that he saw everything and forgot nothing. Then those eyes found Emily. The contact lasted only 3 seconds, maybe 4, but it felt eternal. Emily's breath stopped entirely. She felt exposed, as though the worn peacoat and threadbare sweater had turned transparent. He saw the empty space in front of her where a plate should have been. saw the 4 identical little girls pressed against her sides like fledglings under a broken wing, saw the faint tremor in her hands, the hollows beneath her eyes, the way her body curved protectively even though there was nothing left to protect them from except the world itself. Something shifted behind Vincent's eyes, swift, almost imperceptible. A flicker of recognition, of memory, of pain long buried. Then the mask settled again, cool and controlled. He looked away. Emily exhaled shakily, the sound ragged in her throat. Lightheaded, she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. The room slowly began to breathe once more. Conversations resumed in hushed fragments. Donna moved again, though. Her steps were careful as she approached Vincent's chosen booth near the back. Not the farthest corner, but close enough to observe everything. Vincent slid into the seat facing the door, one of his men taking the opposite side. The other 3 remained, standing at strategic points, silent sentinels who understood their boss needed no protection, only witnesses. Emily tried to focus on her daughters. Chloe had started eating again, small mechanical bites. Ava watched the men in black with wide, confused eyes. Bella's hand trembled as she reached for her milk. "Eat, sweethearts," Emily whispered, her voice thin and trembling. "It's all right." But it was not all right. She could feel his attention still like sunlight through a magnifying glass focused on her skin. She risked the tiniest glance from beneath her lashes. Vincent sat with perfect posture, hands resting lightly on the table. Donna approached hesitantly, notepad in hand. "Coffee," he said before she could speak. His voice was low, cultured, carrying effortlessly across the quiet room. "Black. And whatever you're having tonight, put it on my tab." Donna blinked, startled. Thank you, sir." He nodded once, dismissing her gently. Then his gaze returned, not openly staring, but steady, inexorable, to Emily's booth. Vincent had learned long ago to read fear. He knew its scent, its posture, the way it made people shrink. But the woman across the room was not afraid of him, not yet. She had been afraid before he arrived. Her shoulders had been hunched, her eyes darting to the door in anticipation of someone else. Someone worse. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The remorse that had begun to stir outside now gnawed deeper. How many widows had suffered like this in the shadows of his city? How many mothers had gone hungry so their children could eat? He had built rules to prevent exactly this. Yet here it was, living and breathing 20 feet away, and those 4 little faces, identical, pale, too watchful for children so young, twisted something inside him he had not felt since boyhood. They reminded him of old photographs of himself and his sisters huddled around a scarred kitchen table while their mother counted pennies. The conflict raged, violent and consuming. Part of him, the king who ruled Chicago's hidden empire, wanted to stand and walk out. Involvement was risk. Mercy was weakness. Another part, raw and bleeding, remembered a 7-year-old boy's helpless fury and refused to look away. His phone buzzed once against his chest. A message from Marco outside SUV, still circling the block. Waiting. Vincent's fingers drummed once on the table, a subtle signal. One of his standing men shifted, eyes flicking toward the window. Emily felt the shift in the air again, though she could not have explained why. Her skin prickled. She glanced up and found Vincent watching her, still his expression unreadable but intense. Their eyes met for the second time. This time he did not look away immediately. Emily's heart lurched painfully. Confusion flooded her. Fear mingled with an inexplicable pull, as though some invisible thread had tied itself between them. Who was he? Why did he look at her like that, not with threat but with something deeper, almost pained? Dizziness washed over her again. The diner tilted slightly. She gripped the table harder, knuckles white. Vincent saw the faint sway of her body, the way color drained from already pale cheeks. He recognized malnutrition when he saw it, had seen it in his mother's face too many times. The knowledge struck him like a fist. He stood abruptly. The room hushed once more. His men straightened. Donna paused mid-pour. Vincent buttoned his coat with deliberate calm and walked not toward the exit but toward Emily's booth. Each step echoed in the silence. Emily's breath came shallow and fast. Horror rose, choking. Was he one of them? Had Lenny and Carlo sent him? Or was he something worse? The girls pressed closer, small bodies trembling against hers. Vincent stopped beside their table, towering but not looming. Up close, the quality of his clothing was even more apparent. The soft gleam of cashmere, the subtle scent of expensive cologne cutting through the diner's grease and coffee. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet enough that only she could hear. "You're safe," he said simply. "Tonight you're safe." Emily stared up at him, eyes wide and glassy with unshed tears. Confusion, fear, and something dangerously close to hope warred within her. Vincent's heart, armored for decades, cracked wider. The surge that followed was immediate, overwhelming, terrifying in its intensity. It was not pity. It was recognition. It was the sudden, impossible knowledge that this woman, this thin, brave, starving mother, was somehow meant to be under his protection. Forever. He did not understand it. He did not question it. He simply knew. And in that moment, suspended between snow and silence, two shattered lives began to move inexorably toward one another. Vincent Rossi did not return to his booth. Instead, he remained standing near the counter, one hand in the pocket of his cashmere overcoat, the other resting lightly on the edge of a stool. From this vantage, he could see everything, every flicker of movement, every nervous glance, and most of all, he could see her. Emily Harper felt the weight of that gaze like a physical touch. It pressed against her shoulders, her chest, the fragile curve of her neck. She tried to keep her attention on the girls, wiping a smear of ketchup from Emma's chin, encouraging Bella to finish her fries, checking Chloe's breathing with a subtle brush of fingers against her small back. But every few seconds her eyes lifted, drawn irresistibly to the man in black. He was watching her not openly, not rudely, but steadily, with the calm focus of someone who had long ago learned that the world bent to patient observation. His pale eyes missed nothing. The way she sat angled to shield the girls from the door. The way her own water glass was the only thing in front of her while the children ate. The way her coat remained zipped despite the diner's warmth hiding the thinness beneath. Emily's stomach twisted with fresh humiliation. She knew how she must look unwashed, hair pulled into a limp ponytail face, pale and drawn from too many missed meals, eyes ringed with the purple shadows of sleepless nights, spent listening for footsteps in motel parking lots. Beside his tailored perfection, she felt small, shabby, invisible, yet paradoxically seen in a way no one had seen her since Mike died. Confusion swirled with the fear. Who was he? Why did he watch her like that? Not with the cold appraisal of Lenny and Carlo, but with something deeper, almost troubled. Curiosity pricked at her sharp and unwelcome. She should be terrified. Part of her was. But another part starved for kindness as much as for food, wondered at the steadiness in his posture, the way he had not raised his voice, or made a scene. Across the room, Vincent's inner world raged. He had built an empire on control of territory, of men, of emotions. Yet now control slipped through his fingers like melting snow. The sight of her thin wrists, protective hunch, the quiet bravery in feeding her daughters while denying herself tore at scars he had thought long healed. His mother's face superimposed itself over Emily's, the same exhaustion, the same fierce love that would sacrifice anything for her children. Remorse flooded him, hot and suffocating. How many women like this had suffered in the shadows of his city, while he sat in penthouse offices, counting profits? He had rules, no families, no children, yet rules meant nothing if men like Lenny and Carlo twisted them. The betrayal burned. The failure burned worse, and beneath the anger, something new and terrifying bloomed. A pull, a recognition, a sudden violent certainty that this woman, this destitute, courageous mother, was meant to be more than a passing act of charity. The feeling struck him like lightning, fierce, immediate, consuming. Love, not the gentle kind of storybooks, but raw and possessive and absolute. It terrified him. It enraged him. It felt inevitable. He shifted his weight, fingers tightening in his pocket around the cool metal of his phone. Marco's earlier text still glowed in his mind, SUV circling, waiting. Vincent's jaw clenched. A subtle tilt of his head sent one of his men to the window. Outside, through swirling snow, the black vehicle idled half a block down, headlights off. Waiting for Emily to leave. Waiting to follow. The conflict inside, Vincent intensified violent tearing. Part of him wanted to handle this quietly, cleanly, the way he handled all threats, a phone call, a message delivered, the problem erased. Another part wanted to walk outside and confront them himself, consequences be damned, because the thought of those men anywhere near her or the girls ignited something primal and unstoppable. He forced calm. Control. Always control. But his eyes returned to Emily again and again. She felt it each time, a warmth against her skin like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Her pulse fluttered, confused. Fear should have overwhelmed everything else, yet beneath it ran a thread of something she could not name. Safety, perhaps, or the first faint whisper of hope. It made no sense. He was danger incarnate. Yet when their gazes met for the third time, something in his expression, pain perhaps or recognition, made her breath catch. Chloe coughed softly, a dry wheeze that pulled Emily back. She reached instinctively for the inhaler in her pocket, checking the counter through the plastic window. 2 puffs left. Maybe 3. Her heart sank again. Tomorrow she would have to choose between medicine and food. Vincent saw the gesture, saw the way her face crumpled for a fraction of a second before she smoothed it for the girls. He knew that look, the calculation of a mother deciding which child's need came first, which sacrifice she could bear. His chest tightened painfully. The wealth that surrounded him, private drivers waiting outside in warmed SUVs, a Gold Coast penthouse with views of the lake accounts that could buy entire blocks of this neighborhood, suddenly felt obscene against her quiet desperation. Donna approached his stool hesitantly, carrying a plate of apple pie she had not ordered for herself. "On the house," she said quietly, setting it down. "For earlier." Vincent nodded acknowledgement but did not touch it. His attention remained fixed across the room. Emily gathered the courage to look fully at him again. Their eyes locked. This time neither looked away immediately. In that shared silence, something passed between them, unspoken, impossible to name. For Emily, it was a dizzying mix of fear and wonder. "Who are you? Why do you see me?" For Vincent, it was confirmation. The surge of feeling intensified, burning away doubt. He would protect her. Not out of duty, not out of guilt alone, but because the alternative, letting her walk back into the cold with those 4 little girls and only $20, was unthinkable. Outside, the SUV's engine turned over. Vincent's man at the window tensed. Vincent lifted one hand, barely a movement, and the man relaxed. Not yet. Emily noticed the subtle exchange. Her anxiety spiked again. Were they waiting for her? Had Lenny and Carlo sent more men? She reached for the check. Donna had left face down on the table. Her hand shook as she turned it over. $16.48. She pulled the folded 20 from her pocket, smoothing it carefully. $3.52 left for tomorrow. For Chloe's medicine. For gas to keep the car running so they had somewhere to sleep if the motels were full. Tears pricked her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. Not here. Not in front of the girls. Not in front of him. Vincent saw the tremble in her fingers the way she counted and recounted the bills. Something inside him snapped, not anger but resolve. He stood. The diner hushed once more. His men straightened. Vincent walked, not hurried, not threatening, straight toward her booth. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. Emily's world narrowed to the sound of expensive leather shoes on linoleum. The girls pressed closer, small hands clutching her sleeves. Her own heart thundered so loudly she was sure he could hear it. He stopped beside their table. Up close, the disparity was staggering, his tailored perfection against her threadbare reality, his calm power against her fragile exhaustion. Yet his eyes, those pale winter eyes, held no judgment. Only something fierce and tender and conflicted. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice low enough that only she heard. "You don't need to count that money tonight." Emily stared up at him, confusion and fear, and a desperate, disbelieving hope warring across her face. Vincent's heart, armored for so long, shattered completely in that moment. And in the quiet, snow-lit diner on Christmas Eve, something irrevocable began. Vincent Rossi stood beside the booth, the overhead fluorescent light catching the faint silver threads at his temples and the hard line of his jaw. Up close, the quiet power that radiated from him was almost unbearable. Like standing too near a furnace that gave off no heat, only pressure. His cashmere coat hung open now, revealing a charcoal suit cut so perfectly it seemed to sharpen the air around him. A subtle watch glinted at his wrist, the kind that cost more than most people earned in a year. Emily's world shrank to the space between them. The diner noise faded to a distant hum. She could smell the faint trace of his cologne, something expensive and understated cedar and winter air. It made her painfully aware of her own scent, days-old clothes, motel soap exhaustion. The girls pressed tighter against her sides. Ava's small hand clutched Emily's sleeve. Chloe's breathing had quickened again, the wheeze barely audible but unmistakable to a mother's ear. Emily's heart hammered so violently she feared it might shake the table. Vincent did not sit uninvited. He simply waited, hands loose at his sides, pale eyes steady on her face. There was no threat in his posture, yet the authority was absolute. "Ma'am," he said again, voice low and controlled, carrying only to her ears. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Emily's throat closed. Words stuck there like dry bread. She managed a tiny nod, more a tremor than agreement. Vincent glanced at the girls, 4 identical faces tilted upward, wide-eyed and silent. Something flickered across his expression, too swift to name, but it softened the hard edges for an instant. "Little ones," he said gently, surprising even himself with the warmth that crept into his tone. "Finish your meals. Your mama and I are just going to talk." The girls looked to Emily for reassurance. She forced a smile that felt like glass cracking. "It's okay, babies," she whispered, voice timid and polite the way it always became around anyone who held power. "Stay right here." Vincent pulled out the chair opposite her and sat slowly, deliberately, as though aware that any sudden movement might shatter her. His men remained at their posts, watchful, but distant. Emily's hands twisted together in her lap, knuckles white. She could not look at him directly, her gaze fixed on the table's edge, on the crumpled napkin, anywhere safe. Vincent studied her in silence for a long moment. He saw the faint tremor in her shoulders, the way she angled her body to keep the girls in her peripheral vision. He saw the protective hunger in the way she watched them eat what she could not afford for herself. The remorse inside him deepened, gnawing like hunger he had never allowed himself to feel. This close, the disparity was obscene. His world of private jets and armored cars against her reality of $20 and 4 children to feed. "Tell me your name," he said quietly. Emily swallowed. "Emily Harper. Emily." He repeated it softly as though testing its weight. The sound of her name in his deep voice sent an inexplicable shiver through her fear, mingled with something warmer, something that frightened her more. "I'm Vincent Rossi." She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago knew it, whispered in corners, printed in careful newspaper articles that never quite said enough. Her breath hitched. Vincent saw the recognition, the fresh wave of fear. It cut him. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, the words steady but laced with an undercurrent of pain. "Or your daughters." Emily's eyes lifted, then meeting his for the first time up close, pale blue against exhausted hazel. In that shared gaze, something raw passed between them. "Why?" Her voice cracked. She tried again, soft and timid. "Why are you here, Mr. Rossi?" The formal address struck him like a blade. Mr. Rossi, the name men used when they feared him. From her lips it sounded small, pleading. Vincent leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. Not crowding her, but closing the distance enough that his words would not carry. "Because I saw you," he said, simply. "And I know what it's like to be hunted when you have nothing left." Emily's breath caught. Confusion flooded her. How could he know? How could a man like this, wealth carved into every line of his clothing, power in every controlled movement, understand the cold nights in the car, the choice between food and medicine, the constant terror of footsteps in the dark? Vincent saw the doubt, the guarded curiosity. He pressed on, voice dropping lower. "Tell me what happened to your husband." The question landed like a stone in still water. Emily's eyes filled instantly. She blinked hard, looking down at her twisted hands. He died," she whispered. "Truck accident. 6 months ago." Vincent nodded, once jaw tightening, and after the words spilled out, then halting at first, then in a broken rush, she could not stop. The secret gambling. The men who came 2 weeks after the funeral. The $43,000 she had never known about. The way they took everything, the house, the truck, Mike's tools, the girls' beds, while her daughters watched and cried. The threats if she could not pay. The running. The motels. Chloe's asthma worsening with every cold night. The inhaler almost empty. The $20, that was all that remained. With each word, Emily's voice grew smaller, more ashamed. She expected judgment, disdain. Instead, Vincent's expression darkened, not at her but at the story itself. When she reached the part about Carlo's knock 4 nights ago, will always know, her voice broke entirely. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and hot. Vincent's hands curled slowly into fists on the table. The rage inside him was volcanic, but he kept it leashed. The remorse was worse, the knowledge that this had happened in his city under his watch. Emily finished, head bowed, waiting for him to stand and walk away. Why would a man like him care about a nobody like her? Instead, Vincent spoke, voice rough with restrained emotion. "The men who did this, Lenny and Carlo, they work the edges of my world. They used my name without permission. They broke every rule I have." Emily looked up, startled. Hope flickered, fragile and disbelieving. Vincent met her gaze fully. "They will never come near you again." The promise was quiet, absolute. It hung in the air between them like a vow. Emily's world tilted. Dizziness washed over her, shock, confusion, the sudden, terrifying possibility that this might be real. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Tears fell faster. "Why?" she whispered, voice cracking. "Why would you help us?" Vincent was silent for a long moment. The conflict inside him reached fever pitch, violent tearing. He could give her a simple answer because it was wrong, because he could. But the truth was deeper, more dangerous. "Because when I was a boy," he said at last, voice low and raw, "I watched my mother suffer the same way. After my father died, men came, took everything. She begged. She starved herself, so my sisters and I could eat. I was powerless then." His eyes darkened with old pain. "I swore if I ever had the power to stop it, I would, no matter the cost." Emily stared at him, tears streaming. The vulnerability in his voice, the crack in the armored facade, shattered something inside her. This man who commanded silence with a glance carried the same wound she did. Vincent leaned closer, voice dropping to a near whisper. "And because the moment I saw you protecting those 4 little girls with everything you had left, something in me recognized you, needed to protect you." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Emily's breath stopped. The air thickened, charged. She saw it then, the intensity in his pale eyes, not just compassion but something fierce and possessive and overwhelming. Love not gentle or tentative but sudden, burning, absolute. It terrified her. It undid her. Vincent felt it too. The surge that had begun the moment their eyes first met now roared into full flame. Passionate, consuming, impossible to deny. He wanted to shield her from every cold night, every unfair cruelty. He wanted to give her the world she had been denied. The feeling was violent in its intensity, tearing at decades of control. Outside, tires crunched on snow. Headlights swept across the window, the black SUV returning. Vincent's man at the door tensed. Vincent did not look away from Emily. "They're here," he said quietly. Emily's face drained of color. Terror flooded back, numbing. Vincent stood slowly. "Stay here. Do not move." He turned toward the door coat, swirling like a shadow. Emily watched him go, heart pounding with fear, and something new, something that felt dangerously like trust. In the falling snow outside, confrontation waited, and in the quiet booth, a destitute mother clung to 4 little girls, daring to hope that the king who had just entered her life might truly be her salvation. Vincent Rossi rose from the booth with the controlled grace of a man who had never needed to hurry in his life. The diner remained hushed, every eye tracking him, as he buttoned his cashmere overcoat and nodded once to his men. The signal was subtle, but they moved instantly, one toward the door, 2 others shifting to block any clear line of sight from the street. Emily watched him frozen in place, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. The promise he had just made, "They will never come near you again," echoed in her mind, impossible and overwhelming. Part of her wanted to believe it. Most of her could not. Men like Vincent Rossi did not appear out of snowstorms to save destitute widows. Life had taught her that kindness always came with a price she could not pay. Yet when he turned back to her, his pale eyes held no demand, only a fierce, quiet resolve. "Stay here," he repeated softly. "I'll be right outside." He walked toward the exit, his men falling into step behind him. The bell above the door chimed. As they stepped into the swirling white night, Emily exhaled shakily, only then realizing she had been holding her breath. The girls looked up at her with wide, confused eyes. "Is the man going to help us?" Mommy Bella whispered. Emily pulled them closer, pressing kisses to 4 small foreheads that smelled of diner grease and childhood. "I don't know, baby," she answered honestly, voice trembling. "But tonight we're safe." Outside, the wind howled down the empty street, whipping snow into blinding curtains. The black SUV idled half a block away, exhaust curling into the cold air. Vincent crossed the street alone, hands in his pockets, footsteps muffled but deliberate. The driver's window lowered as he approached. Lenny's face appeared pale and nervous beneath the orange streetlight. Carlo sat beside him, trying for bravado and failing. "Mr. Rossi," Lenny said quickly. "We were just—" Vincent stopped beside the vehicle, close enough that his breath fogged the glass. "You were just leaving," he said, voice low and even. "And you will keep driving until you are out of my city. The woman inside, Emily Harper, and her daughters are under my protection. Permanently. The debt is erased. Every dollar, every threat, every memory of her name. Forgotten." Carlo shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, the Moretti crew backed part of this loan. They'll want—" Vincent leaned down until his face filled the window. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "Then the Moretti crew will hear from me," he said, each word precise as a blade. "Personally. Tonight. You will deliver that message. And if I ever hear that either of you has spoken her name again or come within 50 miles of Chicago, you will not get a second conversation." Silence stretched, broken only by the wind. Lenny swallowed hard. "Understood." Vincent straightened. "Go." The SUV pulled away, tires spinning briefly on ice before gaining traction and disappearing into the storm. Vincent stood alone in the snowfall for a long moment, watching the taillights vanish. The conflict inside him raged hotter than ever. He had just declared open season with a rival family to protect a woman he had met less than an hour ago. It was reckless. It was insane. It was necessary. The love that had ignited the moment he saw her now burned with steady, consuming flame. Not soft or tentative, this was fierce, possessive, absolute. He would dismantle empires before letting harm touch her, or those 4 little girls. He turned back toward the diner. Inside, Emily sat rigid, watching the door. When Vincent re-entered, snow melting on his shoulders, relief flooded her so powerfully her vision blurred. He walked straight to her booth and sat again as though he had never left. "They're gone," he said quietly. "They won't return." Emily stared at him, tears spilling over. How can you be sure?" Vincent reached into his coat and withdrew a leather wallet thick with bills. He extracted several hundreds, crisp and new, and placed them gently on the table between them. $600. More money than Emily had seen in months. "Because I told them to leave," he said. And in this city, people listen when I speak. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, muffling a sob. The sight of the money, real, tangible safety undid her completely. She thought of Chloe's inhaler of warm beds of meals that did not require choosing who ate less. I can't take this, she whispered, even as her fingers trembled toward the bills. Vincent pushed them closer, then reached across and gently returned her folded $20 bill to her hand, closing her fingers around it. Keep your money, he said. This is for them. He nodded toward the girls who watched with wide, wondering eyes. Coats. Medicine. A safe place tonight. Emily's tears fell faster. Why are you doing this? Vincent was quiet for a long moment. The diner around them seemed to fade, the clinking dishes, Donna's careful steps, the soft Christmas music. There was only the space between their hands on the table. Because no one should have to choose between feeding their children and breathing, he said at last, voice rough. And because I can. He signaled Donna, who approached hesitantly. Vincent placed another bill, $50, beside the check. For their meal, he told her. And bring whatever else they want. Fries, hot chocolate, pie. On me. Donna's eyes widened, but she nodded and hurried away. Vincent turned back to Emily. There's a hotel 3 blocks north the Hilton downtown. A suite is booked for you tonight. Paid for a week. No questions. A car is waiting outside to take you there. Emily shook her head slowly, dizziness returning. I can't accept all this. It's too much. Vincent's gaze softened, though the intensity remained. You can, and you will. For them. He gestured to the girls who were now watching trays of golden fries and steaming hot chocolate arrive like a miracle. Emily looked at her daughters, their faces flushed with warmth for the first time in weeks, small hands reaching eagerly, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Gratitude, relief, and beneath it the first fragile tendril of something she dared not name trust in this stranger who had stepped out of the storm like an answer to a prayer she had never voiced. Vincent watched the change in her expression and felt his own heart tear wider. The wealth he had spent a lifetime accumulating suddenly had purpose. The power he wielded no longer felt hollow. Protecting her, feeding her, sheltering her, erasing her fear felt like the only thing that had ever mattered. Outside, one of his armored SUVs idled at the curb heater, running ready to carry them through the snow to warmth and safety. Vincent stood offering his hand, not demanding, simply there. Emily hesitated, then placed her thin, trembling fingers in his. The contact was electric. For both of them. His grip was warm, steady, strong. Hers was cold, fragile, but unafraid. Together they gathered the girls' coats, zipped small hands, tucked into larger ones, and walked toward the door. Donna watched them go, eyes misty. The diner patrons watched in silence. As they stepped into the swirling snow, the SUV door opened. Warm light spilled out along with the soft hum of heat. Emily paused on the threshold, looking up at Vincent. Snowflakes caught in her lashes. Thank you, she whispered, voice breaking. Vincent's throat tightened. He helped her and the girls inside, then paused before closing the door. This is only the beginning, he said quietly. Tomorrow we make sure you never have to run again. The door shut softly. The SUV pulled away, tires crunching through fresh snow. Vincent stood alone on the sidewalk, watching the taillights disappear. The love inside him, passionate, burning, irreversible, settled into resolve. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marco. Tell the Moretti family I want a meeting. Tonight. The war had just begun. But for the first time in his life, Vincent Rossi knew exactly what he was fighting for. The snow had thickened into a blinding wall by the time Vincent Rossi's convoy left the diner behind. 3 black SUVs cut through the deserted streets of Chicago's South Side, headlights carving tunnels of white. Vincent rode in the center vehicle coat, unbuttoned stare fixed on the city sliding past the tinted window. His phone lay dark in his hand. He had not spoken since giving the order. Marco, seated across from him, waited in respectful silence. He had worked for Vincent long enough to recognize the storm behind the calm, the kind that preceded seismic shifts. Warehouse on 31st, Vincent said at last, voice flat. Bring them. Marco nodded once and relayed the instruction into his earpiece. Vincent closed his eyes for a moment, but rest did not come. Instead, Emily's face rose unbidden, pale, tear-streaked, fiercely protective, as she shielded her daughters. The memory of her thin fingers closing around the money he had given her, grateful, disbelieving, ashamed, twisted something deep inside his chest. He had promised her safety. Promises in his world were written in consequences. The warehouse stood abandoned near the old stockyards, a cavernous brick relic smelling of rust and forgotten meat. Snow drifted through broken skylights, settling on concrete floors stained dark by decades of use. Overhead, bulbs cast harsh circles of light, leaving the corners in shadow. Lenny and Carlo were already there, brought quietly, efficiently, by Vincent's men. They sat tied to metal chairs in the center of the empty space, faces pale beneath fluorescent glare. When Vincent entered, coat swirling with melted snow, both men straightened involuntarily. Mr. Rossi, Lenny began, voice cracking. "We didn't know she was." Vincent raised one hand. The words died. He walked a slow circle around them, footsteps echoing. His men fanned out along the walls, silent shadows. "You told Emily Harper," he said quietly, "that her husband owed $43,000. Lenny nodded jerkily. Vincent stopped behind them. "I checked the records. The original loan was $10,000. The truck you took $12,000. The house $90,000 on the market." Silence. Vincent stepped into their view again, expression unreadable. "So you didn't collect a debt. You stole from a widow. From 4 5-year-old girls. And you used my name to do it." Carlo swallowed audibly. "We were just—" Vincent's voice dropped lower, deadly soft. "You targeted mothers who couldn't fight back. Widows who would sell everything, furniture, clothes, Christmas presents, to keep their children safe. You told them debt doesn't die with the man." The words hung in the cold air like frost. Vincent pulled out his phone, opened a folder Marco had prepared. Page after page of names, addresses, amounts extorted. All widows. All single mothers. All terrified. "You will repay every dollar," he said, "with interest. Every house, every vehicle, every stolen childhood memory restored. Personally." Lenny's eyes widened. "Boss, we don't have. You will find it," Vincent cut in. "Or you will work it off for the rest of your lives. Under my supervision." He paused, letting the weight settle. "And if you ever step out of line again, you will disappear. Not dramatically, not painfully. Just gone." The threat was quiet, absolute. Both men nodded frantically. Vincent turned away, signaling Marco. Files were placed in front of them, bank routing numbers for restitution, accounts, lists of victims, schedules for repayment. But Vincent's mind was not fully here. Even as he enforced correction, the inner conflict tore at him with new violence. He had built his empire on rules meant to prevent exactly this kind of cruelty, yet it had flourished in the cracks. The remorse was crushing. How many Emilys had suffered while he sat in boardrooms or penthouses, believing his code sufficient? And worse, the love that now consumed him made every failure personal. He saw her face in every name on the list, heard Chloe's wheeze in every story of a child denied medicine. The passion that had ignited in the diner now demanded total reckoning, not just for her but for every woman these men had broken. His phone vibrated. A message from the driver at the Hilton, Mrs. Harper and the girls are settled in the suite. Warm, safe, girls asleep. Vincent closed his eyes briefly. Relief flooded him, sharp and painful, followed immediately by the burning need to do more, to give her not just 1 week of safety but a lifetime. Marco approached quietly. "Moretti family wants to talk." They claim Lenny and Carlo were operating with their blessing testing territory. Vincent's expression hardened. The rival family had been circling for months, probing weaknesses. "Set the meeting," he said. "Neutral ground. Tomorrow night." Marco hesitated. This could mean war, boss. Vincent looked back at the 2 bound men, then at the files of broken lives. "Then we remind them why war with me is a mistake." He walked toward the exit, coat flaring behind him. Snow continued to fall outside, soft and relentless. As the warehouse door closed, Vincent paused beneath the broken skylight. Flakes drifted down, melting on his upturned face. The remorse remained gnawing, unrelenting. He had not been there for his own mother. He had not stopped every injustice in his city. But for Emily, for the woman who had awakened something fierce and tender and absolute inside him, he would burn every corrupt corner to the ground. He stepped into the storm. Across the city, in a warm Hilton suite, with soft beds and hot showers and room service trays bearing half-eaten pie, Emily lay awake beside her sleeping daughters. The luxury surrounded her like a dream, thick comforters, the hum of heat that actually worked, the faint scent of clean linens instead of mildew. Chloe's new inhaler, delivered anonymously within the hour, sat on the nightstand full and ready. Emily's fingers traced the edge of the $600 still folded in her coat pocket. Tears slipped silently into the pillow. She did not understand why Vincent Rossi had chosen her. She did not trust it fully. Life had taught her that safety was always temporary. Yet in the quiet darkness, with her girls breathing evenly beside her, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not just gratitude, not just relief, something warmer, deeper, terrifying in its intensity. Across Chicago, 2 lives once separated by every measure of wealth and power had begun to orbit one another with unstoppable force. And in the cold warehouses and snow-swept streets, Vincent Rossi began the brutal work of making the city safe for the woman he already loved beyond reason. Morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of the Hilton suite, soft and golden, painting warm stripes across thick carpet that Emily's bare feet had never known before. She woke slowly, disoriented by the silence. No rattling motel heater, no distant highway roar, no fear of footsteps in the hall. For a moment she lay still, listening to the even breathing of her 4 daughters curled together in the king bed beside her. Ava, Bella, Chloe, and Emma slept deeply, faces flushed with genuine rest, small hands tangled in clean sheets that smelled of hotel soap and safety. Chloe's chest rose and fell without the familiar wheeze. The new inhaler had worked its quiet miracle overnight. Emily sat up carefully, her body aching from months of tension finally loosening. The room around her felt like a dream: 2 queen beds with plush comforters, a sitting area with a sofa, a bathroom larger than some motels she had hidden in. On the table sat the remnants of last night's room service tray, half-eaten slices of apple pie, empty mugs of hot chocolate with whipped cream long melted. Luxury she had not dared imagine. The $600 remained folded in her coat pocket, crisp and real. She touched it through the fabric as though it might vanish. A soft knock sounded at the door. Emily's heart lurched. Old instincts surged. Freeze, listen, prepare to run. She slipped from the bed, pulling on her worn peacoat over the same threadbare sweater, and approached the peephole. Vincent Rossi stood in the hallway alone. He wore a different suit today, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, a crisp white shirt open at the collar. Snowflakes still clung to his dark hair. In his hands he carried a large paper bag from a downtown pharmacy, and a cardboard tray with coffee cups. Emily's breath caught. Confusion, fear, and a rush of something warmer flooded her. She unchained the door and opened it a crack. "Mr. Rossi," she whispered, voice soft and timid, the politeness automatic when addressing someone so much more powerful. Vincent's pale eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw fatigue in them, deep lines of a night without sleep. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Emily hesitated, then stepped aside. The girls were still asleep. The suite's bedroom door stood ajar. Vincent entered, moving with careful restraint, as though aware his presence filled too much space. He set the bag and tray on the table. "Coffee," he said, "and breakfast pastries. And this." He opened the bag, revealing prescription bottles, a new inhaler, still in its box, children's vitamins, warm socks in small sizes. "For Chloe." "And the others?" Emily stared, tears pricking instantly. You didn't have to." Vincent's jaw tightened. "I did." He reached into his coat and withdrew a thick envelope, placing it beside the bag. Inside were documents, debt cancellation notices stamped with official seals. Proof that the original loan had been $10,000, that seized assets far exceeded it. A final page handwritten in strong, precise script: "You owed nothing. You were stolen from. This has been corrected." Emily's hand shook as she read. Tears blurred the words. When she looked up, Vincent was watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you do all this for strangers?" Vincent was silent for a long moment. The suite's quiet pressed in the soft hum of the heater, the distant sound of city traffic far below. His inner world churned violently. Remorse for the years he had enforced rules without seeing every shadow they cast. Guilt for the power he wielded that had failed women like his mother and now like Emily. And beneath it all, the love that had taken root in one glance across a diner booth now grew wild and unstoppable. He stepped closer, not crowding, but near enough that she could see the raw honesty in his eyes. "Because when I was 7, he said, voice low and rough, "my father died in an accident arranged to look random. Creditors came the next week. They took everything, furniture savings, my mother's wedding ring. She begged on street corners so my sisters and I could eat. She did things no mother should ever have to do to keep a roof over our heads." His voice cracked just once. "I was powerless. I watched her break piece by piece. When she died, worn out at 42, I swore that if I ever had power, no woman, no child would suffer that way again. Not if I could stop it." Emily's tears fell freely now. She saw the pain carved into his face, the same wound she carried. Vincent continued softer. "And because the moment I saw you in that diner, starving yourself so your daughters could eat, shielding them with a body that had nothing left to give, something in me recognized you. Needed you safe. Needed you whole." The confession hung between them, heavy with unspoken depth. Emily's world tilted. The man who commanded Chicago's shadows stood before her, vulnerable, offering not just safety but understanding. The surge of feeling that answered his was immediate, overwhelming gratitude twisting into something warmer, deeper, dangerous. Love not the quiet kind she had known with Mike, but fierce, burning, impossible. It terrified her. She had nothing to give a man like this. She was thin, broken, destitute, yet the way he looked at her as though she was precious shattered every belief she held about her worth. Vincent saw the conflict in her eyes, the fear and wonder warring. His own heart tore wider. He wanted to pull her close, to promise the world, but he held back. She was fragile, newly safe. He would not take what was not freely given. Instead, he reached into his coat once more and produced a set of keys on a simple ring. An apartment, he said. Lincoln Park. Furnished. Stocked. Safe building. First year paid. For you and the girls. Emily's breath hitched. I can't. You can, he said gently but firmly. And you will. For them. He gestured toward the bedroom where the girls slept. Emily looked at the keys, then at him. Tears streamed down her face. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. Vincent's voice was rough with emotion. Don't thank me. Just live. Give them the life they deserve. That's all I ask. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. The car will take you to the apartment whenever you're ready. Someone will always be nearby if you need anything. Emily stepped forward, impulsive. Mr. Rossi Vincent. He stopped, looking back. She searched for words, voice trembling. You gave us Christmas. Vincent's throat worked. The crack in his armor widened into a chasm. Outside in the hallway, he leaned against the wall for a long moment after the door closed, eyes closed, breathing ragged. The love inside him, passionate, consuming, absolute, demanded everything. Not just her safety, but her happiness. Her future. Her heart. He pulled out his phone. Marco, he said quietly, double the watch on the Hilton. And prepare for the Moretti meeting. No one touches what's mine. The war was coming. But for Emily Harper and her 4 little girls, morning had finally arrived. 3 weeks had passed since Christmas Eve, and the city had settled into the deep freeze of January. Emily Harper stood at the window of her new Lincoln Park apartment, watching snow dust the bare trees along the street below. The brownstone was quiet, warm, impossibly safe, thick rugs underfoot, a kitchen stocked with food she had not had to count pennies for bunk beds in the girls' room, painted soft pink and overflowing with stuffed animals that had appeared one. Morning without explanation. She wore a new sweater, soft gray cashmere, delivered in a plain box with no note. It fit perfectly, as though someone had studied her frame with care. The thought made her cheeks warm even now. The girls laughed in the next room, playing a board game Vincent's driver had brought yesterday. Chloe's asthma was under control, her cheeks rounder already. They had started kindergarten in a nearby school, backpacks, bright and new teachers kind. Emily had begun working part-time at a small florist shop 2 blocks away. Real hours, real paycheck, no more midnight cleaning. Yet peace felt fragile, like thin ice over deep water. She still woke at every creak, listening for footsteps that never came. She still checked the locks 3 times before bed, and she still felt him, Vincent Rossi, everywhere. In the security panel by the door that glowed soft green. In the discreet black sedan that parked down the block each night. In the way groceries appeared when the refrigerator grew low. Most of all, she felt him in the quiet ache that had taken root in her chest. A longing she did not understand and could not name. Vincent had visited twice more, always brief, always respectful. Once to bring winter coats for the girls, thick and warm with Bears logos on the sleeves. Once to drop off school supplies and ask voice careful how Chloe's new doctor appointment had gone. Each time he lingered at the door, eyes searching hers as though memorizing every new detail of safety written on her face. Each time he left, the apartment felt emptier. Tonight, snow fell heavier, muffling the city. The girls were asleep early, worn out from sledding in the park with a bodyguard who pretended to be a friendly neighbor. Emily sat on the sofa, a cup of tea cooling in her hands, staring at the flames in the gas fireplace. Vincent had installed the week they moved in. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from outside like glass breaking, followed by a whoosh and a glow that bloomed orange against the curtains. Emily's cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood. Fire. She ran to the window. Flames licked up the side of the building next door, leaping hungrily toward their brownstone. Smoke billowed black against the snow. Panic surged, numbing and violent. The girls. She spun toward their room, heart slamming. The door burst open behind her. 2 men in dark clothing. Vincent's rushed in. Mrs. Harper, we have to go now. Emily's legs nearly gave way. The girls. One man was already in the bedroom, scooping 2 sleeping children into his arms. The other lifted Chloe and Emma. Emily stumbled after them, dizziness crashing over her. Smoke seeped under the door, now acrid and choking. Sirens wailed in the distance, but too far. They reached the hallway. Heat radiated from the walls. Flames roared somewhere below. A figure emerged from the stairwell, smoke tall, coatless, despite the cold face streaked with soot. Vincent. He moved like a force of nature, shoving past debris, eyes wild until they found her. Emily, the sound of her name and his raw voice undid her. She swayed, vision tunneling. He reached her in 3 strides, arms wrapping around her as her knees buckled. One hand cradled the back of her head, the other supported her weight completely. I've got you, he said, against her hair voice fierce. I've got all of you. Emily clung to him, face buried in his smoke-scented shirt. Shock and terror and relief collided, tearing her apart. She could feel his heart pounding against her cheek, fast, frantic human. He carried her down the stairs himself, refusing to release her even when his men offered. Chloe coughed in the arms of the guard ahead, but the new inhaler was in Vincent's pocket. He pressed it to her lips between flights, steadying her breathing with practiced calm. Outside, snow fell onto chaos, fire trucks screaming, closer neighbors in robes, staring flames devouring the building next door and licking at theirs. Vincent set Emily down only when they reached the sidewalk, but kept one arm locked around her waist as though afraid she would vanish. The girls were bundled into a waiting SUV, blankets appearing from nowhere. Emily's legs trembled violently. She looked up at the burning building, her home, the first real home since Mike died, and felt the old despair rise, choking. Vincent turned her gently to face him. Soot streaked his sharp features, but his pale eyes burned clear and fierce. "This was no accident," he said quietly. "A message. From the Moretti family." Emily's breath hitched. Horror flooded her anew. Because of her he had challenged rivals. Because of her this. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her cheeks. Vincent's arm tightened. "Don't." His voice cracked. "None of this is your fault." He looked at the flames, then back at her face, pale lips trembling still, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The love inside him, already overwhelming, became something savage. He would end this. He would burn their world to ash before letting flame or fear touch her again. Sirens grew louder. Firefighters shouted orders. Vincent guided her toward the second SUV. "You're coming with me tonight. All of you. My building. Top floor. No one gets past my security." Emily hesitated, dizziness returning. "Your home." He met her eyes, raw and unguarded. "Yes, where you'll be safe, where I can protect you." The girls were already inside the warm vehicle, sleepy and confused but unharmed. Emily looked at the burning building one last time, everything she had begun to rebuild, turning to smoke, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. She nodded. Vincent helped her in, then slid in beside her arm, still around her shoulders. The door closed, sealing out the cold and chaos. As the SUV pulled away, red lights flashing across their faces. Emily leaned into him, exhausted, terrified, alive. Vincent held her, close jaw clenched against the storm inside him. The war had come to his doorstep, but in the quiet heat of the car, with her head against his chest and 4 little girls safe in the seat behind, he felt something new bloom amid the rage. Purpose. And the absolute burning certainty that Emily Harper and everything she loved was now the center of his world. He pressed his lips to her temple, a silent vow against her skin. No one would take this from them. Not ever. The Gold Coast penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek glass tower overlooking Lake Michigan. From the private elevator that opened directly into the foyer, the city spread out like a glittering carpet, far below lights, twinkling through falling snow, the lake, a vast black void beyond. Everything inside spoke of wealth, earned and guarded fiercely. Italian marble floors, modern art on the walls, a kitchen larger than Emily's old bungalow, windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Emily had never imagined standing in a place like this. Even now, weeks after the fire, she moved carefully as though the luxury might bruise if she touched it too boldly. The girls had claimed one of the guest suites as their own, filling it with laughter and crayons and the scattered joy of children who finally felt safe. Chloe's inhaler sat on a marble counter beside vitamins and fresh fruit things. Emily once rationed like gold. Yet safety felt temporary, a borrowed coat too fine to keep. Vincent was rarely still. Days blurred into nights of meetings, phone calls in languages she did not understand, sudden departures in armored SUVs. The war with the Moretti family had escalated, retaliatory warnings, blocked shipments, tense standoffs in neutral restaurants, where words were weapons sharper than any blade. Emily saw the toll in the new lines around his eyes, the way he sometimes stood at the windows for hours, staring into the dark. She saw it most in the way he looked at her, hungry, protective, tormented. Tonight the storm raged harder. Wind rattled the massive windows like fists. Thunder rumbled over the lake, rare for January. Vincent returned just after midnight, coat flecked with snow, a dark stain spreading across his white shirt. Blood not his own, but close enough. His driver had taken a graze in a street confrontation near Rush Street, an ambush meant for Vincent. He entered quietly, thinking her asleep. Instead, Emily waited in the living room, wrapped in one of his sweaters that hung to her knees, sleeves rolled many times. The sight of the blood stopped her breath. "Vincent." He paused, surprise softening the hard lines of his face. "You should be sleeping." She crossed the room, hands trembling as she reached for him. "You're hurt." "Not mine," he said roughly, "but close." Emily's fingers brushed the stain, then moved to his face, tracing the tension in his jaw, the faint cut at his temple. Fear and anger and relief collided inside her, tearing at the fragile walls she had built. "You could have died," she whispered, voice breaking. Vincent caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. His skin was cold from the night, but his eyes burned. "I didn't." The words hung between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white. Thunder followed, shaking the glass. Emily's control shattered. She rose on her toes, hands, sliding to his shoulders, and pressed her lips to his fierce, desperate, pouring months of fear and gratitude and longing into the kiss. Vincent froze for one heartbeat, shock, disbelief, the sudden terror that this was a dream he did not deserve. Then his arms crushed her to him, the kiss deepening into something raw and consuming. Passion exploded between them, years of restraint on his side, years of loss on hers, colliding in a storm more violent than the one outside. He lifted her without breaking the kiss, carrying her to the sofa, lowering her gently even as need raged through him. His hands that commanded fear in others, trembled as they framed her face. "Emily," he rasped against her lips. "God, Emily." Tears slipped down her cheeks, mixing with the kiss. She clung to him, afraid he would pull away, afraid he would not. Vincent drew back just enough to search her eyes. His own were dark with emotion, love, guilt, longing, terror. "I've wanted this since the moment I saw you in that diner," he confessed, voice raw. "Wanted you, needed you. But I have no right," Emily silenced him with another kiss, softer this time, but no less fierce. "You saved us," she whispered. "You gave us everything. You see me, the real me, broken and scared and still fighting. No one else ever has." Vincent's forehead rested against hers. His breathing was ragged. "I'm not a good man," he said, the words torn from deep inside. "I've done things. The blood on my hands isn't always someone else's. I can't change that." Emily cupped his face. "You stopped men who preyed on widows. You carried my daughter out of fire. You gave us a home when we had none. You're the best man I've ever known." The confession broke him. A sound, half groan, half sob, escaped as he kissed her again, deeper, slower, pouring every ounce of the love that had consumed him into her. Hands that had enforced brutal correction now touched her with reverence, tracing the line of her collarbone, the curve of her waist, memorizing her as though she might vanish. Emily arched into him, the last of her fear dissolving in the heat between them. For the first time since Mike died, she felt wanted, not as a mother, not as a victim, but as a woman. Desired. Cherished. They moved together in the storm-lit room, clothes falling away like old skins. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a confession. Vincent worshipped her slowly, fiercely, as though making up for every cold night she had endured alone. Emily met him with equal passion, giving back the strength he had restored to her. Afterward they lay tangled on the wide sofa, the city lights flickering across their skin. Thunder rolled distant now. Snow tapped softly against the glass. Vincent held her close, one hand stroking her hair, the other locked around her waist as though afraid to let go. "I love you," he said, into the quiet voice, rough with wonder. "I didn't know I could. Not like this." Emily's heart swelled until it hurt. Tears came again, but softer. "I love you too," she whispered. "It scares me how much." Vincent pressed his lips to her temple. "I'll end this war. I'll make the city safe for you, for us. Whatever it takes." Emily traced the cut at his temple. "Just come back to me." He turned her face to his eyes, burning with absolute promise. Always. Outside, the storm began to ease. Inside, two hearts once shattered by loss and power had found their way to one another. The war waited beyond the windows. But in this moment, wrapped in each other's arms, they had already won something greater. Love, fierce, passionate, unbreakable, had claimed them both. 5 years had slipped by like pages turning in a quiet book. Chicago wore spring again, cherry blossoms drifting along Michigan Avenue, the lake sparkling under a gentle sun. Emily Rossi stood at the window of their Gold Coast home, watching the 4 10-year-old girls chase one another across the private rooftop garden. Ava, Bella, Chloe, and Emma, taller now stronger, their laughter bright and unafraid. Chloe's asthma was a distant memory, managed perfectly with the best care money and love could provide. Emily's hand rested on the slight curve of her belly, feeling the new life flutter within. She smiled softly, the expression no longer fragile. The thin, malnourished woman who had once counted $20 as her entire world had vanished. In her place stood a woman who co-owned a thriving neighborhood cafe, deep dish pizza and homemade pies, warm lights and welcoming tables where families gathered and children drew on paper placemats. Vincent had kept every promise. The war with the Moretti family ended not in rivers of blood but in quiet, decisive correction. He had dismantled the parts of his empire that fed on weakness, shifting wealth into legitimate ventures. Construction that rebuilt neighborhoods, scholarships for children of single mothers, clinics in places where medicine had once been a luxury. He remained powerful, respected, feared in certain circles. But the rules were iron now, no preying on the vulnerable. Ever. He had married Emily in a small ceremony on the lakefront, just family and closest friends. 4 little girls in pale blue dresses scattered petals. Vincent's vows had been quiet, fierce, his pale eyes never leaving hers. He had become father to the girls in every way that mattered, teaching them to ride bikes, attending school plays, reading bedtime stories with dramatic voices that made them giggle uncontrollably. They called him Daddy Vin, without hesitation. Yet some nights when the city slept, Vincent still stood at the window staring into the dark. The remorse never fully left him. He carried the weight of past choices of lives touched by his world before he changed it. But Emily's hand on his shoulder, her quiet, "Come to bed," pulled him back. Love had not erased his shadows, it had given them purpose. On this spring afternoon, Vincent entered the garden quietly, loosening his tie after a day of board meetings. The girls spotted him and ran a whirlwind of hugs and stories about school and friends. He lifted Chloe effortlessly, spinning her until she squealed, then set her down to catch the others. Emily watched from the doorway, heart swelling until it ached. The disparity that had once separated them, his wealth against her desperate poverty, had not vanished. It had transformed. His resources now sheltered, educated, healed. Her strength, her quiet resilience had become the compass that guided his power toward good. Vincent crossed to her arms, sliding around her waist from behind lips, brushing the curve of her neck. "How's our little one today?" he murmured. "Active," she answered, covering his hands with hers. "Impatient to meet you." He turned her gently, eyes searching hers with the same intensity that had first undone her in a snowy diner years ago. "I love you," he said, simply the words still carrying the wonder of a man who had never expected to speak them. Emily rose on her toes, kissing him softly, then deeply. The passion between them undimmed by time, only richer, steadier. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "Every day, more." The girls groaned playfully at the display, but their eyes shone with happiness. This was their normal parents who looked at each other as though the world began and ended in one another's arms. Later that evening, they walked together to the cafe Emily had built from nothing. Vincent's quiet investment, her vision and warmth. Families filled the tables. Children drew. Laughter rose like steam from coffee cups. Emily paused at the door, looking back at the life they had created. She thought of the cold nights in the car, the empty inhaler, the $20 that had once been everything. She thought of the fire, the fear, the moment she had chosen to trust a man the world called dangerous. Love had proven stronger than poverty or power. It had crossed every divide, wealth and want, shadow and light, past pain and present joy. Skin, color, status, history, none of it had mattered. Only the heart. Vincent squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking?" "That knowledge changes everything," she said softly. "The knowledge that someone sees you, really sees you, and chooses to stand beside you anyway. That's the greatest lesson life teaches." He nodded, eyes deep with understanding. "And education of the heart of compassion is the only power worth having." They entered the cafe together, greeted by warmth and familiar faces. The girls ran to their favorite booth, already planning milkshakes. In quiet moments like this, Emily knew the truth. Wealth could not buy what they had found. Poverty could not destroy it. Love, fierce, patient, redemptive, had bridged every gap. And in the years that followed, their family grew. Their cafe became a gathering place for second chances. Vincent's foundations quietly lifted mothers and children from the edge-breaking cycles he once could only witness. Life's greatest knowledge, they taught their children, was compassion. Its deepest lesson was forgiveness of others, of self. Its truest education was love that refused to let go. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel Alex Truths, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to remember that love transcends every barrier. Tell me in the comments, how did this story make you feel? Have you ever seen love overcome impossible odds in real life? Share your thoughts. I read every one, and cherish the emotions you trust me with. Wishing you all good health, a joyful life, and daily peace. See you in the next video. Disclaimer. All stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.